10s. We are now in lesson number 2 in our biology unit, and the focus for this lesson is on what is it that cells do. Okay, and so it's a bit of a complex topic because we're going to look inside of the nucleus, inside of the cell, and we're going to look at how is it that the genetic information that we say is in our DNA, how is it that that information gets translated to build the things that the cells need. Okay, and so this is a pretty complex process. So I want to show you a few images first, then we're going to get down into some of the details, and then I'm not going to try to make it too tricky, but this is really the basis of genetics. And so in grade 11 biology, if you want to take that course, we look at how DNA, basically heredity, right? Like we look at how traits transfer from one organism to another. So why is it that you look like your mother or your father, okay? And you look like your siblings. How is it that the DNA gets transferred to you? And then in grade 12, we spend so much time talking about the actual details of the enzymes that are involved, and we look at the processes at a very microscopic level. Okay, all right, so let's just set the stage here. What are we talking about? We're talking about what is inside of the nucleus, the center of the cell. That's your DNA. Okay, so all cells have a nucleus, and you can see there are typical plant and animal cells that have their nucleus in the center of the cell, and inside of that cell you are going to find the DNA. Okay, so I want you to see right here, this little cell down here is a starfish cell, but can you see that the nucleus is visible? So this is a real cell. This is a scanned microscopic picture, and you can see here that this is the nucleus inside the cell. So there's a nuclear membrane outside, there's a nucleolus on the inside, and depending on which stage that this cell is in, you might even be able to see the DNA highlighted because it'll start to condense and then it becomes darker at different stages. Okay, that was the first diagram I wanted to show you from your textbook. Then the next one I wanted to show you is have a look here from the grade 11 textbook. Can you see that that is a chromosome that is duplicated or replicated, and that's actually what it looks like when it's at a certain stage of cell development. It actually condenses down and it's filled with genetic material, okay? So this is a huge molecule. It's a biological molecule. The molecule's name is DNA, stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and it is made up of nucleic acids, and this DNA is inside the nucleus, inside every single cell in your body, right? Every single cell has the exact same number of chromosomes, unless we're starting to talk about the sex cells. So your egg cells and sperm cells have half the number, but we'll get into that in grade 11. But every other cell in your whole entire body has the exact same set of DNA. So you have 46 chromosomes inside of every single cell. 23 pairs of chromosomes, okay? So this is a replicated chromosome, and it looks really fuzzy, doesn't it? So that's what it actually looks like. And then of course we're going to get to the biological diagrams that we're looking at, and they really sort of simplified as best you can. So here's basically that big fuzzy chromosome. We're going to say, yep, here's what it's going to look like in our textbook, so we can talk about the parts of it, okay? And so on the left you can see you've got one chromosome there. And at some point, a chromosome needs to make a copy of itself so that when the cell divides into two, can then send one copy to one cell and one copy to another cell. That's called mitosis, and that's going to be what the next lesson in our biology series is. Okay? So I want you to understand right now that the one little chromosome that looks like this is called a chromosome, and when it makes a copy of itself, it's also called a chromosome. Okay, so that's what we're going to look like, and this is what it looks like in our textbooks. Okay, so here we go. The working cell. What is this all about? Well, we know that DNA, and again stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, is the starting point for important cell processes, and this is where proteins get made. Okay, aside from the structural role, proteins can also be classified as things like enzymes, which help to break down or do jobs within the cell. And also, when the cell makes proteins, some of those structures can actually be a structural component. It might be a functional part like an enzyme. We'll get into those details, okay? But what you want to think about right now is that the instructions that are in the DNA make stuff. That stuff is mostly protein. So when we say the cell has all the instructions inside of your DNA, really we mean it's the instructions for making proteins. Of course, there's lots of regulatory things that turn them on and turn them off because some cells need to make more than others. It just depends on what the instructions say. Okay? All right, so here we go. DNA is the genetic material found in the nucleus of eukaryotic cells. Each human cell has 46 chromosomes. Okay? Unraveling chromosomes reveal that DNA is what we call a double helical structure. You can see the diagram down below. It shows you that you've got a structure that looks like this, and they call it a double helix. It wraps around and sort of twists up. And maybe in the classroom I'll get a chance to show you the model that we have. In grade 12, we often build the DNA using a Kinnex set. So if we have time, maybe I'll get a chance to show you that. Okay? Now, what do we need to know about this molecule that is life, that's DNA? Well, we know that it's made up of smaller molecules all built together, and these are called sugars and phosphates. Okay? The phosphates have parts of these molecules that you want to become familiar with these terms right here. They have A's and T's and C's and G's, and that stands for adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. Those are the different parts of the molecule. So again, just like we learned that, organelles are the bits inside of a cell, and cells are the building blocks of life. Well, now we're diving into the nucleus inside of a cell, and that nucleus contains DNA, which is another molecule, and that molecule is a big one, and it's made up of little tiny building blocks that make it up. Okay, so now we're looking at molecular genetics. That's what this topic really is. Okay, so learning about that structure. And you would remember from our chemistry unit, right, that this is a molecule of life. So it's made up of carbons and hydrogens and oxygens and nitrogens, some phosphorus. All of these different atoms together make a huge complex molecule, and so our DNA is a molecule. All right, what do you know about the human genome, right? Well, how do we know how many chromosomes we have? Well, there was a human genome project that went to decode all of the DNA in humans, because you know that 99.999% of all of our DNA is the same because we are humans, okay? And if you look at the instructions that are needed to make a human, so the DNA inside of your nucleus, in total, 3 billion base pairs. What does that tell us? It tells us that these molecules are very, very, very small, especially if you think about the fact that they have to fit inside the nucleus, inside every single cell, and your body is made up of trillions of cells. We're talking really, really, really tiny cells. All right. Of the region that we are looking at when we're looking at our DNA structure, okay, a piece of this DNA molecule is what we call a gene. And I think you've heard of that term before. But a gene is the code or the instructions to build one kind of protein. So all the instructions are there, and then when your cell's ready to go and build a molecule of something, it takes the instructions for that building of things, and it only uses the bit that's important for what it needs to build. Okay, so you can see that if you were to take our double helix and go down and see what it looks like even further, okay, here is what the chemical structure of a DNA molecule looks like. Remember we talked about the base pairs that bond together, okay? Well, we're going to get to that when we look at the A's and the T's and the C's and the G's. One thing you want to take away from this lesson is that this part right here Doesn't this look the same as all of the other bits? Can you see how if you had the connects and you were sort of putting them together like little Lego pieces, you would take one nucleotide and it would bond to another nucleotide, to another nucleotide, to another one. So that nucleotide is what we call the molecule that I've just highlighted right here, and it is the building block that makes DNA. How does this double helix bond to itself and spiral around? Well, that has to do with a natural bonding that makes two parts of a molecule stick together. Okay, you know, water molecules are sticky. They like to stick to other water molecules. A very similar concept takes place right here. Can you see that every time a nucleotide has an A on it, it bonds with another one that has a T. That's important. Okay, look down the list. There's another A, it bonds with a T. So the rule is that inside of a DNA molecule, A's bond with T's at. C bonds with G. Okay, do you remember the words, what those letters stood for again? Okay, cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine. And so you can see on your diagram here too, C's bond with G's, C's bond with G's, and A's bond with T's. And that's all we need to remember at the grade 10 level for what that DNA structure looks like. Okay, so let's quickly recap. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It contains all of the genetic information for building living things. Where do you find it? In the nucleus, inside of every single cell. And as humans, we have a total of 46 chromosomes inside of every cell. And a chromosome is made up of DNA. Okay, that's the name of that living molecule that makes up our DNA. Okay, that makes up our chromosome. Okay, that's it for right now. I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to move on to the next part, and we're going to look at the human genome.